the Cold War, arms race, and space race. We're going to fly through this. So in 1949, the Soviet Union developed their own atomic bomb. So one more time, in 1949, the Soviet Union developed their own atomic bomb, and now there are two countries in this world that have atomic bombs, that have nuclear weapons, the US and now the Soviet Union. Now, we started the arms race, arms meaning guns, weapons, right? We started the arms race when we dropped the bombs, the two bombs on Japan, ending World War II in 1945, right? So they now are competing with us. So that's what happened. And things get really scary for us. After that, we were like, oh, dang. And theirs was actually, their atomic bomb was actually bigger. It was more powerful. So we were really freaking out. And at this point, we're just trying to put a lot of money into defense spending. Defense means, you know, money that we're trying to put into trying to defend our country with, you know, new types of weapons, new types of technology, military technology, and things like that. And then 1952, about 3 years later, we come up with the first hydrogen bomb, which is probably one of the most powerful bombs in history. And then the Soviet Union, a year later, they create their own hydrogen bomb. And we're like, what the heck? And theirs was actually 67 times more powerful than the first atomic bomb that we came up with, little boy, 67 times more powerful. That's insane, right? And we're like, at this point, we're like, how the heck do they know about this, that we were making a hydrogen bomb, that they were able to create their own next year? The next year, they must have spies, right? Like working for our government within the Manhattan Project or something. All right, so first hydrogen bomb. How many countries currently have atomic weapons? Too many. This might be a little outdated, but a few years ago, 9 countries had atomic bombs or had nuclear weapons. Us, Russia, UK, France, China, India, of course, Israel would come up with their own because they're a tiny little Jewish country in the middle of the entire Middle East. Pakistan, I don't know if I said India. Brinkmanship. So I'm sure you've heard the phrase, we are at the brink of war. Brink means when you are at the edge of war, like it's about to happen any minute. And so that term actually started during this time period, during the Cold War, because we were at the brink of war with the Soviet Union, with Russia, a couple of times where like we were facing each other, weapons to weapons, and all it took was just a button, a switch, you know, someone's, you know, approval. Basically, it was pretty crazy. Brinkmanship. When did the Soviet Union create their first atomic bomb? 1949, right? 4 years after we got ours. Oh, this is so funny. You got to watch this. When we found out that the Soviet Union had atomic bombs, our school started to really prepare for a possible from the Soviet Union. So we had all these duck and cover drills. You got to watch them. They're all in black and white, of course. They're old school, but poor little kids went through like 4 or 5 drills a day where like a siren would go off in school and they would have to hide underneath their desk as if their desk was really going to protect them, but they just needed to have some type of, you know, plan in place. So you can imagine the PTSD they went through, right? Doing that repeatedly. Arms race to space race. All right, so with the arms race, we began that, right? Oh, you know what? Actually, do I have the video here? No, I don't. Let me see. I want you guys to watch this video, 10 largest nuclear bombs. It is amazing. And then you get to see who won the arms race. Like, was it us or the Soviet Union? The one who comes up with the #1 largest, most devastating nuclear bomb in history. Okay. Arms race to space race. All right, so in 1957, the Soviet Union launched its first artificial satellite, sparking the space race. So it was the Soviet Union that started the space race. They launched a satellite that kind of orbited the Earth, and it would fly really low to where people can go outside and they can see. And, you know, everyone always knew when Sputnik was going to be in their area. So people would always make a little, you know, they'd make a goal like, oh, we're going to go watch Sputnik tonight. It's going to be flying above us at exactly 7:12 p.m. or something like that. And, you know, but then it was also very nerve wracking because you're like, what is that? What can it do? Can it see us? Is it spying on us? Like no one had any clue. And then when this was launched, we were like, what? The Soviet Union started a space race? Like first they're competing with us with arms. They're trying to turn as many countries as possible communist. And then now they have started a space race. Like we didn't even know we were, you know, going to have a space race. So, or that we were, you know, having a race for space. So because of that, we responded by creating NASA the following year in 1958. So we had to create our own space program, research program, space station, all that stuff. So that is that. It was the size of a basketball. It's kind of small because you have to have really good eyesight to see it because I don't think it flew that low. Anyways, that's Sputnik, launched by the Soviets. It was all over the newspapers. First man-made satellite launched by red scientists. Red is a symbol for communism, right? So, like I said, that was 57. We created NASA in 58. At this point, the government is stressed out, the US government. We're freaking out. We're like, oh my gosh, we're so behind in education with our kids. Why didn't we think of a space race to explore outside of our borders? You know, like the Soviets are way, you know, past us, ahead of us. So we started to put more money into math and science education. For an example, STEM, like some of you guys are familiar with STEM, that's here, like on campus. STEM was actually created because of the space race. And, you know, like there was just a lot of money that was put into programs for public education to just, you know, emphasize and make advancements in math and science due to that space race. That's been on the start before. Question 17, which country sparked the space race? That was the Soviet Union, right? Russia. 18, how did the Soviet Union spark the space race? They launched the first artificial satellite, Sputnik. So John F. Kennedy was president, actually. He became president like around 1961. And he, you know, this is like the beginning of the space race that he is president. And everyone knew, you know, we're competing with the Soviet Union. They're our number one enemy at this time. And even though they may have sparked the space race by launching Sputnik, we're going to win the space race. So John F. Kennedy promised the country that we would put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. So by the end of the 1960s, right? That was our number one goal, put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. So unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years later, but you know, our country makes it a goal to carry out his promise to the country. All right, so after we, you know, now that we have satellites up in the air, right, let's start to experiment with life, right? So the Soviet Union, they went ahead and they launched the first Earthling, a dog, into space, and the dog did not survive. It was called Laika, something like that. And then we're like, okay, our turn. We went ahead and we launched a chimpanzee into space. And it was called Ham because, you know, I guess that's the closest DNA to human, you know, life. And, you know, we'll just kind of experiment there. The ape or the chimpanzee did not make it back, unfortunately, alive. And then the Soviet Union, they're like, all right, we're going to go ahead and launch a human into space now. So they're the first to do that. And there's a Russian cosmonaut, Yuri. And actually, I don't know if he survived, but he looks very, very scared, right? Very nervous. It was just into space. It wasn't on the moon. And then we launched our first American into space right after, Alan Shepard. And then here, like the capsule shuttles and stuff like that. And then we win the space race, right, by putting the very first man on the moon, right? That was with the Apollo 11 crew. That is Neil Armstrong who gets the credit, right? And that's July of 1969. Look at that. By the end of the decade, right, just like John F. Kennedy had promised, even though he wasn't alive to see it, we wanted to carry it out, his promise, and we did it. Now, I know many of you guys totally don't believe that this is real. I've heard all the theories. I always ask students in person, and students are always like, well, look at this, and look at the flag, and this and that, and how could this happen, and how can that? And I understand. You know, it has me a little on the, you know, fence too about it being true. But I'm a U.S. history teacher, and I need to teach it like it's true, right? So anyways, on the STAR test, you make sure that you answer this question like the way it's being taught, not by your, you know, your theories, your, what is it called? Anyways, you get it. So anyways, yeah, July 1969, Neil Armstrong lands on the moon. And if you don't believe this, at least you're now hearing it and you're starting to understand why we would fake something like that, right? We're at this crazy space race with the Soviet Union. We're trying to win it. And we're trying to carry out, you know, Kennedy's promise to America. So it kind of makes sense why we would fake something like that. Anyways. And that's where he says his famous words, you know, that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. All right, number 19, what U.S. president promised the U.S. that we would land a man on the moon before the end of the 1960s? John F. Kennedy. Here are some inventions that have come out of the space program, out of NASA. I don't understand the Nike Air thing. Maybe that's just what it was named after. But these are some pretty cool things. Invisalign braces, laser surgery, life support technology. Like those are some pretty cool things. The CIA was also founded, established during this time period. Some of you guys understand the CIA as like, you know, the men in black. They're like, you know, spies. They work for the government. They get intel information, right, on other countries, things like that, right? So that was, like I said, created during the Cold War because of everything that was going on with communist countries. 20, which race do you think was the more important race, the space race or the arms race? That is your opinion. Make sure to explain why. 21, what year was Sputnik launched? 1957. Question 22, how did the US respond to the Soviet launch of Sputnik? Remember, they created NASA. So that's that. My questions are a little mixed up. I just realized that. So they might not be in the exact order of the Pear Deck PowerPoint. They're all there. It just, I moved some of them around and somehow it didn't, like, I don't know. I guess refresh or something.
The Korean War. So the Korean War was from 1950 to 1953. May have lingered on a little longer, but the the armistice and everything that kind of ended the war, the documentation was in 1953. So, but then there's a little bit more to it. Technically, North Korea claims that the war is still going on, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. So it's also called the Forgotten War or the Unknown War. Where is the Korean Peninsula? It's right here next to Japan and by China. So just a little bit of history. Korea used to be one country, and then it also used to be part of Japan. It was part of Japan's empire during World War II and even before. But then after World War II, as you know, Japan's empire was dismantled, and Korea was taken away from Japan, and it was made into two countries, North Korea and South Korea. So like I said, this is all after World War II. And then, okay, sorry. All right. So, yeah, North Korea ended up being communists with the influence of the Soviet Union. As you know, the Soviet Union was just trying to turn many countries communist. And South Korea became democratic and not necessarily controlled by the US, but just influenced by the United States. So you have these two countries that used to be one, and now they're two, and they're opposites. So, and I mean, they share a border, so there's a good chance that there's going to be conflict between the two countries, right? And the border that divides the two countries is called the 38th parallel, which is absolutely important. It's essential to know the 38th parallel as the border that divides North and South Korea. So how did the war begin? The war began when North Korea decided to invade South Korea, trying to unite the two into one communist country. All right, so the Soviet Union did not get involved, but kind of influenced North Korea's decision to invade South Korea. But like I said, they weren't involved with their military. And well, you know, that's when the United States gets involved. Now, you know, like I said, the United States supports South Korea. And when they found out about South Korea being invaded by North Korea and the attempt for North Korea to turn the entire peninsula communist, you know, United States has a policy called containment, right? Where you just, you know, we want to contain communism. We don't want any more countries turning communist. That was our policy that was started in the late 1940s, right after World War II, and it's around 1950. So we need to carry out our containment policy, right? Stop countries from turning communist. And I mean, communism means a dictatorship, people don't have rights, things like that. That could be dangerous for the world. And we just feel like, you know, we should be kind of like a police force for the world and enforce democracy. So yes, we go ahead and we get involved. We help South Korea and the United Nations as well, because the United Nations is new to, you know, the spectrum. United Nations was created after actually 1945, right? The end of World War II. That was something that FDR came up with. But, you know, it's weird because the Soviet Union was also part of the United Nations, yet this is going on. So anyways, the United Nations and the US helped South Korea, came to their aid, sent soldiers. We actually had Americans fight in this war and die. And not a lot of people talk about the Korean War. I guess because it was a small war, but still it was a lot of people that were lost. Douglas MacArthur was also involved in this war. All right, so the Chinese actually get involved in this war, and they help North Korea out. Now, China just turned communist in 1949, and this is 1950, right? So they support North Korea, what they're doing, trying to spread communism. So China sends troops to North Korea to help them out, and we're not too happy about that, because now you have Americans in South Korea fighting the Chinese in North Korea, and that's pretty dangerous. This is a big country. It could have escalated to where we actually attacked China, but fortunately we didn't, because that would have been a disaster. Anyways, all right, the Korean War. Here's some propaganda that the Chinese created showing Douglas MacArthur like murdering babies, kids in China, and this is why the Chinese need to support the Korean War to stop the Americans, stop the US. Yeah, so we're depicted to be like the bad people. Oh, and that's supposed to be us dropping nuclear weapons, atomic bombs on China. So it's like, so the Chinese people can fear us and try to stop us. All right, so the war was quick. You don't have to know any battles or anything like that, at least not for the star. So how did the war end? The war ended when an armistice was signed between North Korea and the US. All right, one more time. An armistice, that's like when both sides decide to cease fire, no more fighting, but it was between North Korea and the US, not North Korea and South Korea. So that is why North Korea feels that the war is still going on, that it never formally ended, because there was never a contract, an agreement, a treaty that was signed between North and South Korea, just between the US and North Korea. So, South Korea is very heavily guarded. We actually have Americans in South Korea protecting the border, the 38th parallel, from a possible North Korean invasion. But North Korea, they won't invade South Korea if we're there. And some people don't support that we're in South Korea protecting them from North Korea. But North Korea has nuclear weapons, and they're probably not the best, but they are trying to make it a goal to I don't know, maybe one day attack us. All right, so part of the armistice or the agreement between like everybody was there was going to be a demilitarized zone in which there's a few miles between the border, the 38th parallel. I think it might be like 2 to 5 miles on both sides, in which there's no military, there's no nobody can be in that zone. They're just giving each other space. So yeah, it's just so they can keep their distance from each other. The results of the Korean War. All right, so Korea remained two countries, North and South Korea. The border, the 38th parallel, still remains the border. In other words, nothing changed, and communism was successfully contained, right? Because if North Korea would have taken over South Korea, then communism would have spread, but we helped contain it. We helped stop the North Koreans from successfully doing that. So that's what happened. 54,000 Americans died. That's a lot of Americans that died in these 3 years. I'm not sure how many Americans we had die in World War II, but 54,000 is a lot for this war right here, for this little war. All right, so what else? And this was our first war in which we were trying to carry out our containment policy. And, Americans start to realize that communism is a real threat and kind of leads to the second Red Scare in the United States, which is our next topic. Let's go ahead and answer these questions. What was the reason for the Korean War? The reason for the Korean War. So, North Korea invaded South Korea, trying to unite the peninsula under one communist country, right? That's the reason. Why did the US get involved with the Korean War? Here are our options. The first one, because North Korea needed help. No, we weren't trying to help North Korea. Because the Soviet Union invaded the Korean Peninsula. No, the Soviet Union did not get involved. Or because the US wanted to contain communism. That's the reason, right? When was the Korean War? It was from 1950 to 1953, right? It was about 3 years long. 4 years long. Question 26, which communist country aided North Korea during the war? Who were we also kind of fighting? China, right? China helped the North Koreans. Question 27, what are the results of the war? In other words, did anything change as a result of the war? Here are some options. No, nothing changed. The two Korean countries remained separate, and the 30th parallel is still the border dividing the two countries. North Korea took over South Korea and turned the entire peninsula communist. Not true. South Korea defeated North Korea, and North Korea had to give up some land. Not true either. So nothing really changed, right? Communism was still contained. Everything remains the same today. So the first one. Communism at home. Oh, my neck hurts. All right, so I had mentioned that we went through a second Red Scare. Remember when we learned about the first Red Scare? It was after World War I, right after World War I. And now we're going through a second Red Scare, and this is right after World War II. Also, I guess, right after the Korean War, right? But World War II and the Korean War are so close to, so close together, but basically, the idea is that it happened after World War II. Not right after, but after. So anyways, and as you know, red stands for communism, right? So it's like we're going through a communist scare in our country. We're very fearful that communists are trying to infiltrate our government and just maybe possibly overthrow the government and turn the country communist. So Americans begin to panic that, what if that's going to happen? So many countries were turning communist at the time. Half of Europe turned communist, right? We got North Korea, we have China, we have other countries that are falling also. And it's just kind of making us panic if we're the next country to do this, right? Nobody wants to give up their rights. Nobody wants a dictatorship. But, there's reasons for this Red Scare, like more specific reasons. There were fears that the government had communists in there, and there was an agenda with these government officials. That the entertainment industry also had been infiltrated with communists, and maybe they were trying to use movies and shows as propaganda to promote and get people to support communism and things like that. Now, it's your right to be communist if you want to. You can be communist. It doesn't always look good on you that you support this type of, government leadership or whatever it is, this ideology. But at this time, everyone was kind of fearful. So it was kind of frowned upon, if you supported communism. All right, second Red Scare. So here's just some propaganda. How and what to tell a communist. These are things these were posters at people's work, in job places. There were ways people would read about stuff like this in the newspaper just in case they ever ran into a communist in their neighborhood or something. It's actually pretty funny. Report all suspected communist activity. I mean, it wasn't illegal, but it just was not really socially acceptable. Okay, the Loyalty Review Board. This was just like a government agency that investigated employees that were suspected of being communists. I mean, there's not much to it that you have to know for the star. All right, who are the Reds? All right, now this is important. HUAC, House on Un-American Activities Committee. It's kind of weird, the name, right? House on, I thought it was of Un-American Activities Committee. So like communism is an un-American, non-American. I don't know, that's how it is. So HUAC investigated possible communists in the movie industry. That is what they focused. The entertainment industry, movie industry, not the government, they're focused on the movie industry. And this agency, this committee, I mean, they went after actors, producers, directors, I don't know, screenwriters, all types of people in the entertainment industry. And tons of people were blacklisted if they were found to be guilty of being communists. And the reason for that, like, there were some movies that came out around this time in which, you know, kind of like, no, I'm not going to say it supported communism, but like, for an example, if there was a movie about, which this is true, if there was a movie about like a very handsome Russian man and he's communist and he falls in love with a American woman who's democratic, and even though people don't think it's right that this communist and this democratic woman are together, but in the end they end up falling in love and the guy turns her communist, and I don't know, like they end up running away or something like that together. Like a movie like that, anybody involved, the actors, the directors, they were all in trouble and they were blacklisted, prevented from ever producing movies, making movies again, because it was like the directors were considered communists for making a movie like this. It was like, are you trying to persuade Americans that it's okay to be with the communists? Like, that's what HUAC investigated. That's who they went after. And they actually, 500 people were fired and blacklisted. That's a lot of people. Film star Larry Parks admits he was a commie. And like I said, they investigated them and then they got them to admit that they were. Not everybody was a communist. Some people just did it for the money, right? It's a role. But that's that. Look at this title right here in the bottom. Red Army pushed across the 38th parallel. That's the beginning of the Korean War when North Korea attacks South Korea. So this is all in the 1950s, right? HUAC was a big deal. I mean, tons of famous actors were targeted, they were questioned, they were interviewed, they were just, drilled with all these ideas if they were communists. There's this group called the Hollywood 10. They were just a group of, these famous 10 producers, directors, actors. I want you to think of like people like, I can't even think of any, Michael Bay. You know what I mean? Like that's a famous, was he producer, director, that was under investigation by HUAC and blacklisted. Like these are some high profile people that had their lives ruined because either they were accused of being communists or they admit they were communists still. So yeah, directors, producers, actors. Question 28, when was the second Red Scare? Was it after World War I, after World War II, after the Vietnam War? It was right after World War II in the 1950s. Who did HUAC target in their investigations? Which industry? The movie industry, right, or entertainment industry? Ethel and Julia. So this is a random spot for me to put this in. In the midst of everything that's going on in the 1950s, the Rosenbergs, this couple right here, this guy and this girl, they were Russian. And remember I told you that the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, really wanted to get his hands on the formulas for the atomic bombs that we were producing in the Manhattan Project. So he infiltrated the Manhattan Project with Russian spies. Well, it was just a theory. Nobody was sure, absolutely sure. I mean, how else would the Russians get the atomic bombs? So it was true. This couple right here, they were found guilty of being spies and turning over the formulas. It took a while. Now, they never admitted it. They denied it, until their execution, like they were executed. But later on, years later, after Joseph Stalin died, the new communist leader of the Soviet Union wrote some papers called the Venona Papers, stating that, giving credit to the Rosenbergs for risking their life, for dying, and if it wasn't for them, then the Soviet Union wouldn't be as far as where they're at with the arms race. So it was true. Joseph McCarthy, this is so important. Let me take a sip of water. Joseph McCarthy was a Republican senator, and he was trying to make a name for himself. He really wanted to be reelected, and he was up for reelection, and he took advantage of this Red Scare that's going on, where people were just panicking, and about communism in our country. He decided to start falsely accusing tons of government people of being communists. He went after opponents, Democrats, because he's a Republican. He actually ended up accusing over 200 people of being communists, but he never admitted who they were. He just said that he just would strike fear in people's eyes, like, I know I have a list of 200 people, 203 people in the US government who are communists. It's specifically in the Democratic Party. And, his accusations were so bizarre that it got the attention of everyone. Americans would watch him on TV, on the news, as he would give these speeches, and people were like, oh my gosh, like, he knows who are the communists in our country. And I mean, it was a big deal, but he was just going after crazy people. He was going after Eisenhower, our president. Come on, Eisenhower, the one who was commander of the Allied, forces or whatever, during World War II. He went after Ronald Reagan. I don't know if you remember. Well, we haven't learned about Ronald Reagan. He becomes president in the 80s. But Ronald Reagan was an actor during this time. He went over, George Marshall, like all these random nice people he attacked and accused them of being communists. But like, he did say he had a list. He never actually released the list. So there's political cartoons. You see, faked letter, doctored photo, like he just said he had all this evidence, but he was just trying to make a name for himself, and he figured if he accused people of being communists, then that makes him look good, because he went out of his way to find out who the communists were, and people would know him better. But he just caused so much hysteria in the country that people hated him. People despised McCarthy, because they eventually, at first they didn't think he was lying, and then they realized this guy has to be lying, because he never admitted exactly who are the communists, and he never showed proof that these people were communists, and people just started to catch on that he was just trying to take the focus off of himself. He could have been communist himself. Have any of you guys read the book, The Crucible? I don't know why I'm asking you guys this. This is a video. So if you're familiar with The Crucible, it's based off of like a witch hunt, right? Where like, you know, like this is a time period in which everybody was accusing women in the United States, like, you know, old times, of course, of being a witch, right? And all it took was one false accusation. Somebody would just, you know, throw your name under the bus and say she's a witch, and then everybody, like, it would spread like wildfire, and then everybody thought you were a witch, and the next you know it, you're being burned at the stake, or you're being thrown off a cliff, or hung, or something, right? Like, it was very intense. You know, the women who lived during this time, and most of the women who were executed were not ever witches, right? Like, it was just accusations. So why am I talking about that? McCarthyism, named after this Senator Joseph McCarthy, who created that hysteria in which he was just blaming all these people of being communists without any proof. It's very similar to the book The Crucible. He was accusing people just like that, and he was ruining lives, ruining reputations. Many people lost their government position, or, you know, ended up going through depression and just leaving the government because of his bizarre accusations without any proof. And I mean, people didn't even want to go against him. People didn't even want to, like, call him crazy or argue with him, because then they would look like they were the communists. It was just really weird. Anyways, he made people scared to speak against him. Like, if people were like, "Oh, he's crazy," then they'd be like, "Are you a communist? Like, is that why you don't like him? Is that why you don't support what he's doing? He's just trying to make the country better, right?" Like, I mean, that's how, like, that's why it would look suspicious if you did talk against him. So he did limit free speech by striking fear in people's eyes, making them afraid to talk against him. So, but yeah, he never had any real evidence, and he was just trying to get ahead of his opponents. So, yes, McCarthyism, crazy hysteria. Everyone's blaming, he's blaming everybody, accusing everyone of being communist. The effects of, you know, the second Red Scare, or, you know, post-war, you know, Korean War or whatever. So throughout the Cold War, there was an intense fear of communism and communists in America. You know, just kind of wrapping it all up, people were falsely accused, people's lives were damaged, freedom of speech was greatly limited. Question 30, what was Senator Joseph McCarthy known for? Being the first communist to run for president of the US, being a Russian spy who worked on the Manhattan Project, or falsely accusing government officials of being communist. This third one is your answer. Which of the following, 31, which of the following best defines what McCarthyism is? Communist hysteria within the country in which people were targets of communist accusations, the time period in which communism was forbidden in the US, or the ideology in which millions of people followed and supported Joseph McCarthy. Nobody supported or followed him, but people were just kind of scared to say that. So it's the first one, right? Which freedom was greatly limited due to McCarthyism and the Red Scare? Which freedom? Freedom of speech.